So trying to look at us as, again, the replica of humanity, and that's no question, but you have a lot of Europeans that don't know that. The people you work with don't know that, and will question you daily. You bring them an Iron Man Sermon book, a John G. Jackson book, a Dr. Ben book. Well, I don't believe that. I didn't learn that. Those are the people you don't need to be wasting your time with. Because if you're not understanding what truth is about knowledge and gaining it. You don't go to school and that's the only thing you learn. Now you learn daily. Jesus was what, 18 years missing? Where was he? Learning from the masters. So again, I'm sure this hall of Maat will be certainly filling up as more masters start coming through here. So this again is 1992. Now, 2002. This is the most recent issue of one of Newsweek's. It says, meet the Chipsons. Jeffrey, Leslie, and their boy Derek will be America's first cyborg family. Are you ready to get chipped? What they got now is a chip that can be put into the body. And you've all heard the stories in the past. Microchips put in people's bodies. It's like, no, they could never do that. No, there's no way they would do something like that. But they putting it in the magazines for you to read now. They could take a little needle, inject it, and there it is. Which means they can track you. They can take data from you. Just put a little scanner on your shoulder. If that's what they injected, there it is. So again, 92 with that little spiel about the African woman on the computer chip. And here you now have Europeans to be injected with stuff. And who knows how far along. That's why people have questioned the whole thing about immunizations. You know, why are you immunizing some child when people have a different way of maybe thinking about immunology and what the immune system really is? You know, so that's some very key and critical things you have to think about in terms of vaccinations. Given these statements, I myself, as a researcher, have always been concerned about how it is that knowledge is displayed and distributed and talked about. I work for Clark Atlanta University, and I've also worked at Georgia State and the Neuroscience Institute at Morehouse School of Medicine. And I work in environments where there's no real discussion about African-centered things. There's no real interest in things that are outside of some little teeny cell. Therefore, if you're into a little teeny cell, you can't see then the global picture of things. So for me, I've always been concerned about how it is that knowledge can be distributed, but also concerned about who got my back. This is an article from The Final Call, 1998. It talks about a Tuskegee researcher that was found dead. She was studying microwave work. It says an educator and researcher who was scheduled to release information during a New York radio talk show regarding microwave experimentation on students at Tuskegee was found dead in her home Friday, September 2nd, in Tuskegee, Alabama. Dr. Barbara Dean Jackson, 56, was found by the Tuskegee Chief of Police. Although friends and associates suspected foul play, police officials refused an autopsy, and Dr. Jackson's body was cremated and memorialized on September 6, 1988. So I say that to say, knowledge is powerful, and it scares the hell out of some people. Specifically if you are into what? Control and capitalism. There is no damn way you're going to have a David Letterman hitting some now, and I'm bringing this into the contemporary context now of America and where we're at. David Letterman replacing a Ted Koppel on some ABC News program. ABC owned by Disney. They want a show. They don't want information being told to the people. They want a show. So if you got people that are coming out with information, changing the whole context of microwaves, everybody uses microwaves, but microwaves could have an impact on our children, our personal development. If microwaves are part of that whole electromagnetic spectrum, that light, sound waves, broadcast bands from your radio, TV, exerted on us, people talk about people living in power lines, or not living near power lines and developing cancers and things and leukemia. People having what? These so-called cell phones and people talking about brain tumors because of the transmitter near the head. Man, that stuff is real. And our bodies are nothing but generators that are responding to everything that's in the environment. And if you got melanin, you are super in tune with the environment, which means you may also then have some problems with health. You know. So again, I just mentioned this only because that's why, even on my text, I go with T. Owens more. I might not get no funding from the federal government if I'm saying these kinds of things, and they ain't into that. So I used the other name to get the federal funding and do some writing in the literature. But on terms of revolution, I kind of use a name to kind of go incognito, as I like to say. You know? So, as we talk about where this melanin is and how powerful the topic is, it's a figure I have in the text. Let me, okay. This is the belly button of an African woman prior to birth. As you see on the middle where the belly button is and the long line going down to the vaginal area, there's a melanated line. People call it the lineus nigra, or black line. Why would that be forming while a child is developing inside? And how could it form? What's going on there? Well, I don't work on a maternity ward, but I doubt it if many white people have this black line that's developing, and if they did, it ain't this dark. That is melanin forming on the outside of the belly. Now this is why I think it's so deep. You know how people get caught up in their own stuff because like they think it's exciting. But this is us. If you look at this, look at the belly button. Look at the shape of it, okay? Now, morphogenesis means the development of something as it goes through its stages. Look at the nervous system. Up top, 28 days, 42 days, 49 days. If you look at it 49 days, see the child on the left, in terms of, not left, but on the side, and you can probably look at your neighbor, because you look at the ear, your ear looks like an upside down fetus, doesn't it? So maybe look at your ear, your neighbor's ear, okay? So you got this fetus developing, and you look at it from the side. Now if you look at it from the top down, you see this shape. So as the fetus is developing inside, it looks just like that so-called shape that is developing right there on that belly button. Melanin is at the very early stages of neural development. Without it, you got some problems. Without melanin developing in the nervous system, you got some problems. One particular, no, we'll talk about that problem. But one particular thing you look at is neural tube defects. People talk about children growing up deformed. Those are really drastic things. But I'll mention another one that kind of looks at also how it is that the skin is darkening and what's causing that. It's something in the brain. Something called hormones. Something called melanocyte stimulating hormone. They said humans don't have it. Yeah, white people didn't have it because ain't nothing happening. Their skin's not darkening with the changes of the hormones. Animals like what? Frogs, tadpoles, squids. These animals have changes in color. Chameleons. I mean, it's evident in the animal world. Well, people don't change. Yeah, white people ain't got colors. How are they going to talk about that? African people do. So now there's something to now investigate. So now where do we go in the brain to investigate that? Before we do, another piece that I have in the text is the cellular Ka. And I use this in African terms to explain the science here. This is actually a cell, melanocyte, in your skin. The one we just saw with the woman with the belly, okay, the dark colored skin and the darker colored skin, that's all just melanocytes. So the more what? Melanin, then the what? Darker the person. Check. So the melanocyte is what houses the melanin. So you got all these so-called cellular processes, nucleus, the endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi apparatus, forget all them terms. The point is, look at the way that the cell is. So, how I use the term Ka, you know about the whole Kabbalah terms that came from African terms that other cultures also use. Ka was like the first division of the soul. And people talked about in the past when the Kemetan people were like chanting and going out there before they built the pyramids, not people from spaceships coming down building that stuff, but they had to get into a certain frame of reverence. People were out there doing calisthenics and praising Almighty Ra. Praising Almighty Ra. Ka. Just like the cell in your skin. Just saying, Almighty Ra bathe me. So just the power of what is in our bodies. And that was the whole thing even about this Aquarian gospel of Jesus. It even starts off talking about it's not so much man in particular, it's man reaching that higher state of consciousness to be like the one, which is all. So that's, I think I heard a question as I did come in about, so I'm struggling with my spirituality and about different ways to look at things, and But the point is, they all could be correct. It's a matter of how you look at yourself in the context of all that. I'm not questioning people do Islam, Buddhism, Taoism, Christianity. No, it's your personal belief about that, but there's a general truth to everything. And we just don't talk about history to really get to the truths of everything. That's where the concern is. So again, this is, again, skin melanin. So you can see the power of it because you just saw it developing as the woman's about to give birth, and you saw something that related to it deep within in terms of the fetus developing. Now, beyond this skin melanin, you have an area in the brain, and I have 20 minutes left, Brother Carson. So we'll go into the brain because that's what I'm saying about the dark matters. Dark matters, dark secrets. Dark matters meaning that it's a play on words. It really does matter to be dark. Without it, you're in trouble. Beyond the brain, there are, beyond the brain, those who may be into medicinal work, know about health, nutrition, there's a disorder called PKU, phenylketonuria. So when a child comes out the womb, blood has to be taken, or urine samples, to measure a certain chemical called phenylalanine. If it's too high, that's a problem. If it's too high in urea, that's a problem. So phenylketonuria, too much phenylalanine. What is phenylalanine? So I got get a little deep on y'all, just in terms of the chemicals, but just understand it in the context that it produces melanin. Phenylalanine helps to create something called, or converts into something called tyrosine. Phenylalanine and tyrosine are common dietary substances. How would you classify those two by names? Phenylalanine and tyrosine. Amino acids. He's cheating. You got a PhD in chemistry. That's cheating. Amino acids. Where do they come from? Your diet, your food. So without that important substance and proteins and just important foods, your body doesn't get what it needs. So that's why we may be in trouble as African people living in this society, given the diet that the white man gave us. Yeah. Not eating what we used to eat, therefore now thinking of other thoughts. Not doing what we are used to doing because our body's not trained to how they should be. We can't go to do studies in Europeans and give them drugs and say, okay, the same thing's going to apply to African people. No, and one reason would be because of melanin. So PKU is a very devastating disorder for Europeans. It's primarily a European disease. But guess what? All babies got to get pricked and probed. So I was concerned when my baby in 1992 was born. This doesn't affect us, but it was a state requirement. Okay? Because it can be treated by the diet. So it's a recessively transmitted genetic disorder. When we say treated by the diet, we'll just eliminate phenylalanine from the diet and you correct the situation. The deep thing that I'm presenting to you is that kids who have PKU, who are not treated, have mental retardation, have a lightening of skin, and got some serious behavioral disturbances. Say a little louder.
Sound like Caucasians to me.
It sound like Caucasians to me. So without this system developing properly, with melanin being very important, because again, what I just told you about those amino acids, they can go make melanin in the skin, they can go ahead and make melanin in the brain. As I told you with PKU, you got melanin in the skin where they light in color, you got melanin in the brain where they got mental retardation. That's a problem. That doesn't affect us as much as it does Europeans. Okay, that's skin. Now then with the brain, there are major centers in the brain that are melanated or have color to them, pigment. We're calling it neuromelanin. One very particular area is called the substantia nigra. I don't know if you ever heard of that before, but substantia nigra, Latin for substantia, substance, nigra, black. So it's a black substance actually in the brain. I'm showing you this. I'm going to show you 4 planes of the brain. When I say planes, I'm just talking about cuts, sections. So we're not all radiologists, but you just have to have a 3D dimensional view to look at, I guess, the brain. And I guess kids today will be able to do it because they like all them video games. They can do all that stuff, right? If you look at the brain, sitting right here, and you make a slice through here, and then you look at the brain from up atop, where those centers are. Right here in the dark portion, and it's kind of hard for the transparency. If I had it on a computer, a digital image might be a little better. But the dark area here is called the substantia nigra. So this is one location where you can clearly see it in the middle portion of the brain. So you got your front part of the brain, back part of the brain, make the slice, cut, and again we're looking at this area in here, deep in the center, called melanin. So the same area in the drawing, deep in the center, it has pathways that go to other parts of the brain. Well, there's a specific chemical that is important for this area to work. It's called dopamine. You ever heard of dopamine as a chemical? Dopamine is a neurotransmitter. Without it, you got a lot of problems. One, it's very important for a state of euphoria, elevating your mood. It's also important for movement. It's produced in this area, the substantia or the nigrostriatal pathway for movement. There's also dopamine in other areas of the brain, like the ventral tegmentum. Won't get too deep into that, but the point is, if this is destroyed, no melanin, no dopamine, you got a disease. What's the name of that disease? Parkinson's disease. So people shaking, or they have problems with their walk, called festination or shuffling with the feet. Tremors at rest. When you say tremors at rest, that means, sir, you stop the hand, it stops. If you have no control over that, there's nothing inhibiting the shaking. That's why there's tremors at rest. If you tell a person to do something, okay, maybe they can do it, there's no shaking. But if it's at rest, that's a problem. The chemicals aren't working right. Those areas are being destroyed. Could toxic substances be doing that? If it primarily happens to people who are older, right? But there are cases, white kids out in California taking some synthetic drugs, MPTP, which breaks down to some other metabolite, destroying these areas of the brain. 20-year-old white kids developing Parkinson's disease. Hey, evidence now that there's some chemicals that are latching onto the brain. If this part of the brain, and also here in the skin, is helping you to protect yourself. But you know how if you had, brother Pierre had a sponge up here, I guess for that, with a table or something, and you see got some black stuff on it, right? Suppose we kept on using it and kept getting black. Kept on using it, kept getting black. We never washed it out. It's now no longer doing its job. It's just dirty, nasty, and toxic. So over time, as you put things in your body, pesticides from food you eat, things can have an impact then on your brain. That's a problem. So I'm just making mention that since melanin can attract things, that's where we then get into the problems of motor problems. 2 points on this though. One is, beyond saying there's a problem, suppose you turned it up, pumped up the volume. Maybe now you play basketball like a Michael Jordan, right? Or it's Allen Iverson right now, versus the Dirk Nowitzki right now, or the Larry Bird that you heard of in the past, set shots. So Venus Williams now we got the Serena Williams. Every sport, I use those little examples, we revolutionize the sport. Psychomotor abilities, it comes from where? Your brain, not your skin, your brain. So there may be reasons why we are more dynamic, rhythmic, the drum, movement, being a very important part of our reality, because the way the brain is constructed, versus other people may not have that turned up enough. Check. So beyond that piece, I'll say this, I guess it's going to be on tape, I guess we have to question it. But with Muhammad Ali, the baddest brother on the planet, true? Nobody was stopping him. Brother was wolfing on all people, white people included.
Yeah.
We got to shut this nigger up. She got to keep this brother quiet. Is there any possibility that he could have been silenced by working around in them cabins and the places that he was training, and cabins with pesticides and toxic stuff all painted on, and with his metabolism up, and over time,
They drew it out.
just wore him down. Because he ain't physically like debilitated like many other people who got Parkinson's.
That's right.
Just can't say what he's been saying. Devastated. But you talk about white folks and the devastating things they do, I would never not question that situation with a brother like that who's now the greatest. Now they want to call him the greatest. You can't wolf no more.
That's right.
So now he's the greatest. But we have to look at, again, the brain areas that are destroyed and potentially a lot of things in our environment that can cause that. So again, just another plane of the brain, and we'll conclude here. So again, if you look at the side of the brain, make a cut all the way down, and then we look at the brain from this way. We're looking at all the pieces that we just cut through. You have another area here called the locus ceruleus, also substantia nigra in the same, it's not the substantia nigra, but the locus ceruleus produces another chemical called norepinephrine. Norepinephrine is an important neurotransmitter also for globally activating the brain, for keeping us alert. Dopamine, mood, norepinephrine, alert. So these chemicals are all in places where there's darkness in the brain. So people talk about 12 melanated centers in the brain. In the text, I just have a little breakdown of how I would classify that. So if you have, again, cross section of the brain, cut through half of it, look along the brain stem, spinal cord up the brain stem, at the midbrain area, and the rest. Well, these dots here make reference to where some of those areas we just talked about are. And as you see, they lead up like in a column. If you have an overripe banana, you cut it in the middle, see all those dots and specks in the middle of it, kind of visualize it the same way in terms of in our brain and spinal cord as it goes up to the brain. And think about when people meditate. You have to breathe properly, you have to focus on something, and there's a point where you feel a tingling sensation in your head. The pineal body is this gland sitting deep right in the center. It's the only organ that's kind of like unitary. Everything else is bisymmetrical. You know, you got one over here, one over here, one over here, one. Pineal body just sits there by itself. It's floating in fluid. What I relate to this as, since it's floating in fluid, you think about vibrations. There's some way that vibrations can stimulate us and cause that organ to move and maybe become erect and then do its job. One thing it produces is this chemical we already talked about, this chemical called melatonin. So by producing melatonin, it helps to what? Do its job. One job is it's secreted at nighttime, and having the first book, what's happening is that it retracts the granules in your skin so that what more light can come in. Nighttime, there is no light, right? You're under covers or you're in a house, you're closed off from the sun. So melatonin kicking out at nighttime helps to retract the granules so what more light can get in. Dreaming, you dream at nighttime. Melatonin is probably important for the dreaming state. Melatonin is very important in terms of a chemical that makes it, serotonin. Heard of serotonin before? Most of your drugs that are very powerful today for treating what? Antidepressant function by stimulating serotonin. So this melatonin has a whole lot to do with also mood. Because y'all know, and we'll leave it, close it on this with the pineal gland, winter depression. It's a term called seasonal affective disorder. There are some people during the wintertime, they just feel sad. You know, people who used to relate it to, well, they ain't got no money for Christmas and Thanksgiving to buy people things, so they feel bad and sad. And no, it's now a physiological thing people are observing. So seasonal affective disorder is really related to the environment. During the wintertime, is the sun shining more or less? Less. The sun is going away. So your now body is becoming what? Out of tune, out of rhythm with the environment. We mess things up because we be staying up all night reading and studying, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, messing up your whole sleep pattern, getting up 4 in the morning, all out of whack. Maybe that's why we are all whack society, because we're all out of tune with the rhythms that the world has presented us for what? An eternity. So with melatonin being released at nighttime, and if the light's changing, the only way that some of these people are corrected is to give them more light. Or just going on down in Jamaica where the sun's always shining, just be happy. So that's one of the treatments. But the point is that pineal gland being the center of the head, also related to some cultures with that third eye, that dot in the middle. Some people say Indian cultures use it for marriage, and some type of connection with their husband and whatever. But that dot on the forehead relates to this spiritual awakening. As we talked about in the very beginning with Christ consciousness opening up. So there's some physiological correlates, that is, things that are biologically in our bodies that relate to all this stuff we're talking about in terms of Christ. He was a human being like we were. So was Buddha, Moses, so was Muhammad. All of them were just like us, which means we all have the same opportunities to reach that state. But without a knowledge, you will never reach that. That's why the white man controls the knowledge base. That's why they now want Disney with ABC putting on David Letterman versus Ted Koppel to put on a show. But those who want the knowledge will be at the places like the Hall of Maat, and I thank you for your time. Any questions before we go?
I have one. Isn't it possible to, for your melanin to become toxic after cell phone use, computer use? I've noticed some of my employees in the past, mostly it was African American women and Hispanic women, developed carpal tunnel in their wrist from using, I thought, the computer a lot.
Okay.
And they were the only ones that did, that had to have, something corrected in their wrist, whatever they do with that surgery. But
Only the African people had to have corrections with?
and Hispanic women, carpal tunnel.
Yeah. Because I would look at that really as a positioning thing. I don't know if it's because most people who...
And that's what they're saying that it is, but I'm just asking because I'm just thinking, because you're on that computer, and for example, with the cell phone usage, that stone that's imported from the Congo,
Okay.
that allows your phone memory, it's a green stone that's brought here, put in the cell phone to maintain your
Didn't
memory
know.
use.
Okay.
That is also one that can cause you to become toxic with your melanin, because it's an extra, it actually works like your melanin does in the body, but it's a stone that's brought
Right.
from Africa here
Right.
that allows your memory in your cell.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure about the carpal tunnel and the connection to the melanin. I hear, like you said, there are some people that may get it more than others, but they also may be more people that are in those positions where they have to do it. I don't know, just maybe a correlation with the number of people in that position.
And that's what the Western world was saying, that it's because of the positioning of the wrist, but I noticed I had 35 employees, all African American, Caucasian, Hispanic, and was only the melanated women that had this problem.
Wow. I really couldn't respond to that, except because I would go with the same line of reasoning that it's just the person's positioning a long time. Because I've worked on the computer and sometimes with the ergonomics. That's why I got a whole area called ergonomics.
Right.
Dealing with the positions of computers, chairs, and all that, and eyes and terminals. That just that little time of typing, my hand being in the wrong place, kind of sore. So I just couldn't relate it then to the melanin piece. But that whole thing about utilizing certain types of elements that transduce, conduct information better. They've been studying the melanin stuff and have the references in the science of the melanin for years, decades, about it having its semiconductive properties.
Yeah.
Because they got trains that run on semiconductive, properties in terms of real fast. Well, the same thing is happening in the nervous system. So when you start talking about elements that are found in the world, in the environment, we are really part of the earth,
That's we're a transmitter.
Right.
Then it would make sense that if I'm using a machine that is putting out that energy,
Okay.
that I'm going to pick that up.
It's just hard for me to relate that though, because you're picking things up really as it's coming in because you're staring at it. It's kind of hard just to translate it to then a part of the body like the wrist. That's all I'm saying. But the video terminal is radiation.
Yeah.
I mean that's coming into your body,
Into your body, into your skin.
Right. So So if you look at that from that perspective, the whole skin being, but then it's like, well, why is it just the wrist though? That's what I'm saying. It could be other areas of the body.
It's actually in the bone, in the tissue, is what
Deep.
it is. When they
Okay.
go in and operate, they go into the tissue.
Okay.
So,
It's deep in.
Yeah.
Right. So, well, I certainly wouldn't exclude it. I just don't know anything enough about that to kind of correlate that. Even with the melanin, I mean, you have melanin in the organs. There's no question. Your internal organs have melanin. How it is studied has been the problem because it's like an indestructible substance. It's hard to break down. But that's what's so great about it. Even when you start talking about carbon dating things, and even that word carbon, melanin is a carbon-based molecule. Just trying to put that up there as a substance just so we can have that there to talk about. But melanin is a carbon-based substance. Carbon, black. They now got carbon microphones, carbon headphones, carbon, all types of things for generating electricity and energy. Is dark in color. And it goes along with the same thing about our bodies being just responsive to all that electromagnetic radiation in the environment, but Europeans not being in tune with all that. So one simple way I look at that is looking at the, can't find the melanin one, is our bodies, our brains, okay, were constructed to pick up conscious waves. Radios are constructed to pick up radio waves. TVs, broadcast bands, TV waves. So if you look at our brains, we can tune into all that. Europeans don't necessarily respond to that. That's why they're so devoid of spirituality. For us, it's a different perspective, So as you talk about the body and melanin being everywhere, yeah, you look at our hair, it's antennas. It's not matted dog-like hair where you can't get any energy in. No, it's an antenna. The double helix. Just like what? The DNA molecule. So we're just walking replicas of we're a microcosm of the macrocosm.
Have you noticed whether or not we are increasing in melanin as we age, or decreasing, or it stays the same? And I ask that question because I noticed even in my family how some of my older family members look younger as they're getting older.
Mm.
So is there any scientific information out there that says whether or not we are increasing in melanin levels or what?
Well, over time, ultraviolet radiation is damaging. It's toxic. So over time, the darker you are, then the more protection you have. And even living in certain areas, people live further down south are certainly going to be much more darker than people living further away from the so-called equator and from the dark areas of the earth. So it depends upon, again, where these families are looked at. But as people age, we're talking about melatonin decreasing. Even as they age, you say maybe the dark color appears, but their skin looks nice, but melatonin is decreasing. They also have sleep pattern changes. So there's clearly changes as people age, and we can clearly see them physically and behaviorally. The important thing is, how is it working? It's supposed to work for protection. But as we destroy it by putting nasty foods in, chemicals, had one up here you heard about NutraSweet, right? Put stuff like that in your body, you're then causing a problem where your body is not being able to process things properly. So if you don't fast, as Jesus Muhammad did, you ain't gonna never reach a stage of consciousness. If you don't meditate, tune into self, you'll never get to that point. This is, it says NutraSweet. Sweet poison, spartamine. I'm telling y'all, stay away from it. Composed of 3 molecules, phenylalanine, aspartic acid, and methyl alcohol. A human-specific, highly toxic poison, methyl alcohol. The thing about this is that methyl alcohol is converted into formaldehyde. Now, I got a chemistry professor up here to check me on this to say, I'll be darned if you ain't right. When you drink alcohol, that's ethyl alcohol. Ethyl alcohol breaks down to something called acid aldehyde, which breaks down to a harmless substance called acetic acid. So if you have too much acid aldehyde in your body from drinking alcohol, that's what gives you that hangover, that bad feeling. Acid aldehyde, formaldehyde. So what's formaldehyde? An embalming fluid. So NutraSweet in its conversions can be broken down to an embalming fluid. So look at over the time, and why I find it so deep, I got a whole lot of white collars that drink that diet stuff, which contains this stuff.
They love it.
Love it. What is it they love about it?
No. Diet Coke.
Yo, that's pretty deep, ain't it?
But it gives them a rush, doesn't it?
Evidently.
Because I noticed they drink, what's it, Mountain Dew, and now it's Red Mountain Dew, but it's like their morning beverage, coffee,
Wow.
and assistant to coffee. So I know it has it gives them lift.
Opposite, yeah.
That's their sun that they use to get up in the morning.
It's pretty deep, isn't it?
Yeah.
The chemicals. See, their bodies are much different than our bodies.
Speaking of chemicals, what's the relationship between melanin and drugs?
Melanin and drugs?
Yeah.
So that's the thing about if you take drugs, which are toxic substances, the body can absorb it. And if it's absorbed in those areas that are melanated, then the cocaine stimulates dopamine and makes you hyperactive. I never taken this, I don't know the feeling, I'm just telling you how it's supposed to work. So given that if these areas are highly melanated, they absorb it much more, it can help to protect the body, but the more you take in, there's then a problem, which means maybe diminished functioning. Yes.
Do you think that's why the problem with drugs in the black community is so prevalent because of the fake melanin and how once we
Right, I think that's what he was trying to say.
Okay.
Once
So
we start using or abusing drugs, it affects us more in dynamic ways because of this virus.
yeah, there's a book by Wallace Terry called An Oral History of the Black Vietnam Veterans. I just use it as one example of the brothers who were there in Vietnam. You know, it was a pretty gruesome experience. I mean, I hadn't been in Vietnam. I don't know people who here have been, but I mean, you're talking about people cutting off ears and putting them on necklaces because they got down something proud that they killed somebody, you know. It was a sick situation. White folks was taking uppers, quaaludes, things that stimulate them, get them up. I don't know if quaaludes are stimulant. We don't take quaaludes, but something like amphetamines. They were taking things to push them up. Black folks were taking things to put them down. You know what I mean? They was already up physiologically. So that whole experience was devastating, but you had two different kinds of people taking two different kinds of drugs to deal with that situation. So when you start talking about this day and age and drugs and crack cocaine being very prevalent in our communities, implanted, put it in, is there a reason why maybe we then succumb to certain kinds of drugs? If dopamine is something very important for that system I just told you about, and it's highly melanated, you then, 3 minutes, highly melanated, you then have a problem with how that system functions. So the more dopamine you have, people say, hey, the higher and more so-called elevated you are, but it leads to a point of being schizophrenic. That's the problem with some schizophrenics. They got too much dopamine. I ain't saying black people are schizophrenic. I ain't saying that. What I'm saying is that maybe we have an elevated state of mood because we have in our bodies what are supposed to do it, versus putting in substances that we don't need to do. Question.
You were talking about the cell phones and the waves coming in and then the loud music making, the children hearing messed up. But what about when they put the earphones in their ears, the waves can't escape. So does that do anything to the brain when the earphones are in the ear and the waves are like inside?
Good question. I would only look at it on a social level though, in terms of what it is that they listen to and what's constantly going in. I can't.
Aren't the electric waves might be doing something to their brain? Because they're not escaping. I mean, am I correct?
It's a good point. I wouldn't be able to elaborate that on extensively. A physicist or someone who knows about the mechanisms of hearing and its transduction, but I mean, because you can hear it too though. They turn up too loud, it's coming out.
So what is it doing to their brain? That's what I'm saying. If I can hear it, then what is it doing inside?
Yeah. Well, let me conclude this by saying these questions are what are needed. If you ain't questioning things, you'll never learn. And I'm only concluding that because we have to conclude the tape, but I have a question to respond to that.